At 18, where I lived, I could vote. I could legally buy alcohol. I had an unrestricted driver's license for 2 years already. Today, at 18, you can vote, true, but the beer is 3 years away. Driving comes with a whole rule book of restrictions. And the draft registration, well, we'll talk about that. So what happened to when you turn 18, you're an adult?
And get off my lawn.
Thanks for dropping by. I'm CJ, this is Geezer Gab, and today we're talking about something that frankly doesn't get discussed enough. The milestones of growing up. Not the birthday cake kind, the legal, cultural, and psychological kind. The ones that used to tell you where you stood. Now, I'm not here to argue whether things then or now were better or worse. That's what the comments section is for. What I am here to do is look at how the markers of adulthood have shifted, sometimes forward, sometimes backward, and what that means for how we think about growing up. When I was in college, I had a psychology class where we spent a whole semester on the thesis of a book called Passages by Gail Sheehy. The basic concept was that adult life isn't just one long flat road. It moves in stages. Predictable crises, transitions, turning points, and each one reshapes who you are. Now, Sheehy was mostly writing about the bigger arcs, your 30s, your 40s, midlife, but the foundation of it all comes from the early passages, the ones that take you from kid to not a kid anymore. And here's the thing. When I was growing up, those passages had ages attached to them. Specific, concrete ages. You hit the number, you crossed the line. There wasn't a lot of ambiguity about it. That's changed some. And it's worth talking about. For most of us, 16 was the first real milestone. Not because of anything earth-shattering, but because of the car. I got my first driver's license at 16 after driver's ed in school and a few weeks with a learner's permit to practice. Back then, most kids took driver's ed as an actual class. I took mine during summer school. It was way faster. And the learner's permit was more of a parental courtesy than a required time span. There were no minimum permit periods yet. That came a year or two later. And I want to be clear about what the actual license looked like. It was a piece of paper. Literally cardstock. No photo, no laminate, just a folded piece of paper that ID'd me and said my state trusted me to operate a motor vehicle, which, in retrospect, is both charming and terrifying. And this, of course, was before consumer color printing, so faking this ID wasn't as easy as it would be now. But here's the thing. There were no restrictions on it. No, only drive with an adult in the car. No driving after 10 p.m. You passed the test, you got the license, and you were out there on your own in traffic. That felt enormous because it was enormous. For the first time, you could go somewhere without asking anyone, well, except your parents. You could just leave and come back on your own terms, or your parents' terms. You know how that goes. Today, most states have what's called a graduated licensing system. You start with a learner's permit, like we did, but now with a minimum time period. And then you move to a restricted license, and eventually, sometimes not until you're 17 or 18, you get a full unrestricted license. The rules vary widely by state, but The general idea is we're going to ease you into this. Statistically, it works. Teen driving fatalities have dropped significantly since graduated licensing became standard. But something else happened too. Fewer young people are bothering to get licenses at all. The urgency just isn't there the way that it was. When I was 16, a driver's license was freedom. Today, for a lot of kids, it's just more class, more tests, more paperwork. 18 used to feel like a portal you walked through. On one side, kid. On the other side, adult. Done. Part of that was the 26th Amendment, ratified in 1971. It lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. The argument was pretty straightforward. If you're old enough to be sent to war, you're old enough to vote for the people who send you there. It's hard to argue with that logic. And speaking of war, selective service. The draft had been a reality for a long time, and even after Vietnam wound down and the active draft ended, registration didn't just quietly disappear. While President Ford eliminated the requirement to register in 1975, for which I was very relieved, President Carter reinstated mandatory selective service registration in 1980 for males between 18 and 25 and continuing thereafter. And the law persists. You still have to register. And while the debate about whether to include women has gone back and forth over the years, for most of our history, it's been an 18-year-old male thing. I remember registering. I was part of that previously exempt group that now had to trudge down to the post office and fill out the card to register. I was not a happy camper. Vietnam was still a healing wound, and I didn't want to be drafted into another war like that. And it would remain a possibility until I aged out. And honestly, even though I'm way too old now and it doesn't affect me, I'm still kind of raw about it. That's a passage. That's the kind of thing that makes you feel the weight of adulthood in a way that no birthday cake ever does. Here's where it gets interesting. Because most of the story of adulthood milestones is about ages moving earlier, voting at 18 instead of 21, driving at 16. But there's one that went the other direction: drinking. For a stretch of time in the 1970s, a lot of states had lowered their drinking age to 18, in line with the voting age logic. If you're an adult for one thing, you're an adult for another. Made sense at the time. Then came MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, founded in 1980 after a 13-year-old girl was killed by a drunk driver. And they were not messing around. They pushed hard. And in 1984, the federal government passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act. The mechanism was clever. The feds didn't change the drinking age directly. They just said that states that didn't raise the drinking age to 21 would lose federal highway funding. By 1988, every state had complied. And tobacco followed a similar path, though later. For most of my life, 18 was the age for cigarettes, cigars, snuff, whatever. In 2019, that moved to 21 federally. So here's the odd picture. At 18, you can vote, sign most contracts, join the military, and register for the draft. But you can't legally have a beer or buy a pack of cigarettes. we decided you were adult enough for some things and not for others, which is a choice. So where does that leave us? When I was growing up, adulthood arrived in a pretty clear sequence. 16, drive. 18, vote, register, drink, be treated as an adult by the law. Those were your markers. You knew where you were in the progression. Today, it's more of a patchwork. Driving comes sometimes later and with more restrictions. Drinking is 21, voting is 18 still. Selective service registration is still 18 for males, even though we haven't had a draft since the mid-70s. Some things moved earlier, some moved later, and the rules change depending on what state you're standing in. Gail Sheehy's point was that passages matter, that moving through defined stages is how we build identity. And I think there's something to the idea that when the passages get blurry, when there's no clear line between not yet and now, it gets harder to know where you stand. I'm not saying the old way was better. Fewer teenagers dying in car crashes is unambiguously good. Raising the drinking age probably saved lives too. But something got traded in the process. A certain clarity, a certain sense of arrival, of respect and responsibility. We used to cross lines, specific, identifiable lines. And once you crossed them, you gained a confidence about yourself that you didn't have before. For the younger folks watching, I'm curious what that feels like from your side. Is there a moment, an age, an event, where you feel like you've actually crossed into adulthood, or does it feel more like a slow fade? For the older crowd, do you remember what 16 felt like when you got that license? Or 18 when you registered to vote or for the draft? Those moments had weight, and I'd love to hear your story. But now this video has reached its closing milestone. So I'm CJ, this is Geezer Gab, and remember, liking is groovy, subscribing is far out, and the passage into being old, I'm still working on that. See you next time.